we've already prayed tonight, I think. Those of us who went to Mass.
Yes.
Not all of us.
No, it was great.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, amen. Gracious God, we give you praise and thanksgiving for this superb day. We ask that you hear us tonight, and as we come to be nourished by the Word among us, the Word made flesh, and to listen to your words, especially about how we take care of one another in line with serving the poor and the needy in our midst. We ask you to bless Beth, who is with us tonight, and to bless all those who are so much in need of our services, that we may rise always tomorrow to meet them. We ask all of this through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mrs. Beth Tobin. Beth and I go a long way back. She reminded me tonight when we both went to graduate school together at Assumption College. So that degree is really older now. But both in religious studies and religious education. Beth, I also worked for many years down at St. Mary's Parish in Southbridge. And then was Southbridge, as you know, everything got kind of amalgamated into one another. And my good friend, Father Peter Joyce, was the pastor, associate there, and then the pastor. Beth was working with Peter at that time, and then she left there to go to St. Peter-Marian, right? Because I said to somebody, well, she was working with the Catholic Church in the parish, and she needed money, so she went to the Catholic school. But she's been chaplain there for how many years now?
19.
19 years. And I just said to Lisa Shocker, and I said, I want you to meet Beth Tobin. You two have something in common. I said, what? You're both retiring this year. So this is Beth's, she's the mom of 3, grandmother to 2. So she has far more credibility about children than I do. Thank you, Beth.
Let's hope so.
Good to have you here. Thank you.
Great, good evening, and thank you for having me. Yeah, it's great to be here and be in such an active parish. As I was sitting at Mass and then down at dinner, I'm thinking, I feel like my talk is going to be below where you're already at as a parish, but whatever. When Father asked me to do it, I said Catholic social teaching is kind of my thing. And he asked something about faith and families, and I thought, we live in our families, the way that we take the faith home and act it and act on it and bring it out into the world is really about Catholic social teaching. So I thought maybe we could kind of put those two things together. Catholic social teaching has a 125-year history. 1891 was the first documented Catholic social teaching, Pope Leo XIII. And then over the course of the years, popes have added to that body of writings for the most part. Probably about 30, 35, maybe 40 years ago, scholars who have nothing better to do than sit there and read and read and read and try to find things in common between all these documents came up with what they call the 7 themes of Catholic social teaching. So I thought what we might do is visit each of those themes that run through all of those documents, and a little story about each, and then how do we bring those into our families. And if we've got families, I can see, well, maybe not little ones. Does anybody have little ones in here?
Grandchildren.
Grandchildren, okay. Me too. So I'm going to try to hit the various age ranges as we go through. So the keystone theme of Catholic social teaching is dignity of the human person, which is really saying basically, if we believe that every person, by virtue of the fact that they've been created by God, deserves to be treated with dignity. Whether they're old, young, male, female, what color they are, what religion they practice, it doesn't matter. Each deserves to be treated with dignity. And I think we do that by listening to the stories that each has to tell. And being respectful of those stories. So one instance in my life not too long ago where I kind of encountered it, my middle son married a woman who was Jewish. So that was kind of a, when they first started dating, she said to me, is it okay with you that, that we're dating and that, we're looking to get married? So I would rather see him with somebody that has some kind of a faith life than none. So let's just see how we can bring these together in our families. So back to the dignity, recognizing that each person has value, right? So when it got to be the wedding, they wanted to do their own thing. My youngest son was the officiant, and they asked her father and me to do a piece of it. So they asked me to do a prayer, and he had, I forgot what part, he had a different prayer that he had to do. So as I was preparing for this, I was like, okay, I don't want to offend anybody there. Half the people at the wedding are going to be Jewish, so if I start talking about Jesus, this isn't going to go well for them. So I wrote this kind of generic prayer that left that out, which didn't really feel comfortable to me, but I was trying to be where they were at. Unbeknownst to me, her father didn't do the same thing because he wasn't going to be talking about Jesus, but he didn't want to do any of like the Hebrew and the real Jewish stuff. So we presented our things to our children, and they both looked at us and said, "This is not what we wanted." We wanted you to be true to who you are and who we are each, and bring that, because we're joining these two families together. And can we bring that to the ceremony and celebrate who we both are and respect that we're different? That's really what dignity is about. It's that being open to who each person is and respecting the difference and celebrating the difference between us. So how do we do that in our families? I read actually on Instagram, we were talking downstairs about not doing social media during Lent, but this woman that I follow is a therapist at Georgetown. And after the shootings last week in Parkland, she was saying, you know, the thing that our children are, so many of our children are missing is, and she talked about her son's kindergarten teacher, and she said every day when those kids came in the door, she was like, I was so nervous to drop my son off the first day at school, and was somebody going to take care of him? She said, I brought him in, and the teacher got right down, face to face to that little guy, and said, welcome to this classroom, I'm so glad you're here, it's wonderful to have you, and she did that every single day to every single kid. You know, when our kids come home, whether they're, you know, the parents of our grandchildren or our own kids, you know, when they come in the door, just to say, I'm so glad you're here. Tell me what's going on in your life, and stop whatever we're doing and meet people eye to eye and listen to those stories. I think that's the way we treat people with dignity. It's just to recognize every person in our life that way. You know what it's like when that doesn't happen, right? Not feeling good. So there's and that dignity is the keystone theme of Catholic social teaching. I always say, if we really practice that, we wouldn't have to worry about the rest of them. We could just, because that's all it would take. But in order to help us understand that one, the bishops and the popes have broken it down a little bit more. So the second one I want to look at is the call to family, community, and participation. Recognizing that as our God is Trinity and lives in community, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, the call for each of us as Christians is to do the same. So our smallest community is our family. That's the first place. And then to connect. Now this seems, as we can see here tonight, a beautiful community. And I've only heard great things about you from Father Michael and the other people that I was sitting with at dinner, which was awesome. So to be involved in communities, whether it's parish communities, civic communities, scouts we were talking about, there's so many school communities, but to be involved. You know, my pastor always says, show up. That's the most important thing you can do is show up. And when you show up and be part of that community, that's how we as Christians have to live. You know, we can't just kind of go off on a desert island by ourselves. That's not the call for a Christian person. And the last is participation, because there are people in our communities, and maybe they're not even in our communities, maybe they're outside of our communities wanting to come in, who are not participating or can't participate for various reasons. How do we call those people in? I want to share a little bit of a story on that one. I do some volunteer work with hospice. My job is to be a visitor. So I go in and sit with people who are dying, sometimes not in the very beginning, it doesn't feel like they're dying, but as it gets closer, and just spend time with them listening to their stories. I appreciated how important that was Not necessarily for my interactions, although those are amazing, but when we were training, one of the women there had a father-in-law who was in the hospital or nursing home dying, and she went to visit, and when she got there, she could hear in the room there was a conversation going on, so she stood out in the hallway and just waited until whoever was in there was done. And the person came out, and as she was listening, she could hear her father-in-law telling all these stories about when he was in the service and his family and stuff. And she said to the woman that came out, who was a hospice visitor, "How did you get him to do that? Because he won't tell us those stories." She said, "I just looked up over his bed, and there was a picture of him there in his uniform, and I just asked him about it." She said, "I realized that as family, sometimes we think we know all those stories, and we don't ask the questions anymore. And so he wasn't sharing the stories with them. There were stories that they hadn't even heard before." I had a lady that she just died December 30th. I've been visiting her for most of the last year. And when I was and oftentimes her daughter was there at the same time. But one time she wasn't. And she told me something about that she lived in Brighton. I said, "Oh, my son lives in Brighton." He said, "Where'd you live?" Now, she was on the dementia wing, but she knew her address, so she told me her address. I looked it up on my phone. I said, "My son lives like right across the street from where he used to live." So we started chatting about it. Her daughter never knew that she lived there. I was sharing it with her daughter. She never knew that she had lived there. So those are the kinds of things where we can connect with people and make them still feel part of a community at that part of their life where they're really feeling, what is their life about in those last days. That's kind of an extreme example in some way, and yet I think really so much a part of what we need to be about with all the people that we encounter in our lives. How do we do that in our families? Listen to the stories, ask the stories. My mom's beginning ages of dementia, and she just turned 90, and I made her a book of pictures from her life for her birthday. She spent hours sitting with that book and just trying to remember those stories. But it was also a way for her to begin to tell me those stories. Some of them I hadn't heard yet. And as she looked at the picture, I'd seen the picture for years, but didn't really know the story behind it. But she spent 2 days, and every time she looked at it, it was new, which is amazing. Anyway, but you understand what I'm saying. So again, how do we bring our families into the communities? How do we become participants in the communities? But always trying to pay attention to those people who maybe are not feeling that they can participate in communities in some way. Maybe they're the wrong color, or the wrong sex, or the wrong religion, or whatever it is. How do we make sure that those people, stories are told and also listened to by us? Third one. It's hard to remember all 7 of them in order. Preferential option for the poor. And important, a lot of times we hear this one just saying the option for the poor, but important that preferential word in front of it. And really what the bishops and the popes are saying with that is when we are making decisions in our lives, when we're voting, and when we're proposing laws and policies and all those kinds of things, always think how are those going to affect the poor first. That's where we consider first. Once we've thought about that, then we can look at the other people. But the preferential part is important to remember the impact of the decisions that we make on the poorest among us. And I know this is a parish that's helping the poor. I heard about your Thanksgiving soup and meals and coats, and I looked at the bulletin to see what kinds of things were going on, and I saw some, is it brown bag? Something? And I'm sure there's lots of other, there was another one too, serving meals somewhere. Where is that? Where was it?
Who was the meal? Mercy Meals?
Maybe that was it, looking for volunteers for
Yes.
meals. Okay.
Groceries.
Groceries. Okay, yeah, there's a food bank downstairs, right?
The thing that
Okay.
is, that we've had some difficult times financially, but each week, 10% goes out in tithing, regardless of the situation. It's extraordinary.
Awesome.
Extraordinary.
Awesome stuff. So I know that stuff is happening here. No doubt. I was like, okay, we don't need to hear that message. But let me just share a story with you, because sometimes I think those stories help us to hold on to the meaning. I don't even know how many years ago it was now, but I spent some time in Mexico with a Young Neighbors in Action group. I used to take kids around the country to do service work. And we built a waterless toilet instead of just like using the dirt in the backyard for a family. And honest to God, their house was built, you hear these, with pallets and scraps, like hoods of cars and things like that is how the house was built. There was maybe 3 bedrooms, and then a little room that they kind of used as a kitchen. But I wouldn't call them bedrooms the way we experience bedrooms. They had beds in them, that's what made them bedrooms. Anyway, we went one year, we went back the next year, and we weren't working at that house the next year, but we went up just to check in on them and see how they were doing. The woman's name was Mari. She had left southern Mexico. I don't know if I said it was in Juarez, Mexico, but anyway, she had left southern Mexico because her husband had beat her. She was covered with bruises and scars and stuff, and she had, I think, 8 kids that she dragged up there to try to get away from him. So we got there, and she was so happy to see us, and we'd come back to see her and stuff, and she pulled the 2 of us into one of the rooms, and we sat on the bed. And then when we were done, she looked at me and she said, "Now I want you to know the next time you come here, you can come and stay with me." And I was like, okay. But my first reaction was, if I lived in a place like this, I wouldn't invite somebody to come stay here. I'd be embarrassed of it. And yet I was embarrassed of myself for thinking that, because that's not, she was so proud of what she did have. It was just amazing, and to feel so welcomed, and I think, who understands this better, her or me? Her. Her. It was a lesson I needed to learn about really respecting and embracing each person for who they are, not for what they have. And she was the most amazing woman I met. Another story she told us that always stays with me. She was working in town, in the Quiadoros, and she was doing the night shift and leaving her kids alone. And it was not a great place, safe place or anything like that. And she said every night I would take the bus home, and all the way home I'd be praying and praying and praying that my kids were going to be safe when I got home and that they'd be there. She said when I would get off the bus, her house was kind of on the top of a hill, she said I'd look up and I would see a man dressed in white sitting on the fence. She was, that was the angel watching over my kids while I was gone. What faith! What faith! What lesson she had to teach me. So when we're thinking about the poor, there's so much there besides just the need. And to look beyond the need and see the person and the lessons that they have to teach us, I think is really what that preferential option for the poor is. And the more we can bring our families and ourselves into situations where we meet those people and have conversations with them, and learn their stories, the more we're never going to forget them. And the more our decisions then think about them first. But it takes that stepping out of our comfort zone and having those conversations. So that's that one. The next one, it's also a Mexico story, but the theme is the dignity of work and the rights of workers. A lot of this stuff came out when we started forming labor unions and so forth, and there was so much pressure on not doing that, obviously, from the business owners. And so the popes and the bishops came out and said, look, this is a right that people have. They have a right to have safe working conditions, fair wages, health care, leisure time, those types of things. So the church spoke out loud and clear that this is what needed to happen. But I think the other part, the first part of it, the dignity of work, is important too. To recognize that our work is our livelihood. Our work is how we care for our families. Our work is how we bring our gifts and our talents and our joys to our world. And so, for some people, that's harder. The work is harder than others. But to appreciate the work that each person does as something that has value. Excuse me. Again, that same little town in Juarez, there was a gentleman that worked with all the kids that were there working. His name was Jose Luis. And interestingly enough, at least 3 of the kids that came on that trip with us wrote their college essays on Jose Luis's work ethic. Because, oftentimes oftentimes the stereotype of Mexicans are lazy. He was the hardest worker I've ever seen in my life. He was working in 105, 110 degree weather, digging ditches, putting in the waterless toilets, trying to direct teenagers who had never, worked with cement and cinder blocks and shovels before, trying to keep them working, but he never stopped, never ever stopped. They were so impressed with this man. It gave him such dignity in his community. He was so well respected in that community for the work that he did. A lot of the work was for the community, but also I think just because of his work ethic. It was an amazing thing to see. That's where I think my youngest son, who can be a little bit of a lazy, learned a little bit about what the value of a hard day's work is. So anyway, so how do we bring that to our families and to our children and to our grandchildren? I think, my husband and I always say you can always tell a lot about people about how they treat waitresses or waiters. There's one place. The cashiers, the workers that we encounter day to day, how do we treat them and respect them? And how do we teach our children and our grandchildren how to do the same? Do we meet them eye to eye? Or do we just take their work for granted and, take my change and walk away? Those types of things, that reaching out to those people who are doing their work, and how do we respect their dignity by the way we treat the job that they do. Some of it's hard work, really hard work, hard physical work. Bringing the drinks out to the guys that are working out in the hot sun, those types of things where we showed, my mother was great at that. Whenever people were working around the house, she was always baking for them and bringing them cold drinks and all that. Just, to recognize and respect them and show them some dignity. Let's see, 4, 5. I have them in my pocket in case I can't get to it. All right, I got it. Solidarity, I do. The next is solidarity. And the teaching on solidarity is recognizing the connection that we have to all, that we all have the same needs of love, of belonging, and each, no matter what, again, race, creed, sex, religion, sexual preference, whatever it is, we're all one. And I think usually when I'm teaching this to my students, this is a story I tell that helps them wrap their head around it. There was an astronaut that was in a 5th grade classroom talking to the kids about one of his trips. I don't know if you call it a trip, but missions, I guess. And he had a picture up of it's an iconic picture of the Earth from space. You've all seen it, I'm sure. And there was a little boy in the classroom that kept looking at the picture and looking out the window and looking at the picture and looking out the window, and this went on for a while, and somebody finally said to him, what, are you okay? What's going on? He goes, I'm trying to figure out why that picture doesn't look like, and he was looking at a globe that was on the windowsill, doesn't look like that one. That one's all divided up. And this one's not. The wisdom, right? But that's the thing about solidarity. We make boundaries. We teach stereotypes. Those things don't happen naturally. We spend a lot of hard work trying to make them happen. I'm not sure why. But solidarity is trying to break those down and trying to see that we are all one. And what happens on one side of the world affects us here and vice versa. I spent some time, probably one of the great blessings of my life, a number of summers in the Winnebago Indian Reservation in Nebraska, a little bit, probably about 60 miles north of Omaha. And I went there really not knowing much of anything about Native American history, other than what we saw in cowboy and Indian shows and stuff, right? That's what I knew. Pretty ignorant. And it was the first time in my life that I ever felt like the outsider, not the middle-income white woman, which sometimes can be an outsider, I know, but this was really outsider. And there's a lot of pain and hurt still in our Native American people. And I was running a program trying to teach like the kids that came to do service about Native Americans, and I don't know anything about Native Americans. So I first of all had to sit back and let them kind of run the program with a little bit of help, because I knew I couldn't do it. It wasn't my story to tell, because I didn't know the story. But there were times when we would be talking and I would say something that really they would take offense to. I can't even think of an example, but one of the things they were very upset is that they all have their license plates all start with the same 2 letters that signify that they're Native American. So wherever they go, everybody knows it. Well, we don't, because we don't know anything, because we don't have them around here that are living in reservations. And they were very upset about that. And they have to show their card when they go shopping. But and in my mind, because I'm coming from a whole different place, I was like, but you get like money off when you show them that card. So what are you complaining about? Ooh. Too many other things I didn't say to them. What are you complaining about? But in my head, that's what I thought. And then, they proceeded to tell me about the way that they're treated there and so forth. And I mean, there's so many issues I could spend all night just talking about that. But it helped me to appreciate that, again, if we want to live in solidarity, you've got to take the time to sit and listen to the stories from the people who've lived the stories. Not from the history books, not from the, the scholars' books, but from the people who have lived it. Because they're the ones that know what they need. And how, I don't want to say be of help, because again, they were so much more inspiring to me than I ever was to them. They were just amazing, amazing people, holy people, grateful people within their community, and just the rituals were so beautiful. It was just amazing when you think of all that they have lived through to get to that point. So, how do we do that in our families? Solidarity. I think the more, and this is for all of us, the more that we can encounter people who are different from us, the more we can live in solidarity. Sometimes I'm as guilty as this other. I'm afraid to go to an Ethiopian restaurant because I don't know anything about it. Like, I'm going to look like an idiot. I look like I don't belong, that kind of stuff. And yet, they, for the most part, are so happy to have somebody come in to appreciate their culture and learn about their culture. I have 2 Korean students this year who are from Korea. They're just coming here to study. And after the Monday after the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, I had so many questions about Korea after watching the opening ceremonies. And they came in, they happened to be the only 2 in the room for like 45 minutes. So I said, all right, guys, I got a ton of questions for you. Can you tell me, what about this, and what about that, and what about this? And they knew their history. I mean, amazing number. Anything I asked them, they knew the answer to. And at the end of it, they both said to me, Mrs. Tobin, thank you so much for asking us those questions. We feel so good that you care about who we are and what we stand for and who our people are, that you took the time to ask us those questions. I'm like, well, I want your phone number so I can text you the next time and say, all right, now why did they just do that? So anyway, those are the kinds of things. If we could do those kinds of things to meet people, whether it's in restaurants, whether it's, I don't know, there must be Spanish masses up here.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
We could have one if we wanted. That's Father Carlos, isn't he?
That's right. But does he do one here?
No.
There's
no real need.
No need here. Okay. But it's an amazing thing. Anybody been to a Spanish mass? Yeah, they're beautiful, right? Latin? No. There must be something there. Anyway, those types of things where we can travel, obviously, is a way to meet other people. But to take the time to really hear their stories and ask them those questions. Sometimes, I find in our school, we have probably 50 or 60 students either from China or Korea, that most of the people in our building I think they're going to insult them if they ask them questions, and they're dying to be asked. They want to share their story. So, and that's across the board for the most part. You might bump up against somebody that's resistant, but not for the most part. Most people want to tell their story. 6th one, care for God's creation. One of my favorites. Our earth gives us our food, our water, our air to breathe. If we don't take care of it, it can't take care of us. That's the message of the popes and the bishops, right? So he was 3-year-old at the time, he's 4 now, grandson, is very earth conscious. I'm not sure where it came from, a little bit from his father, a little bit from me. But anyway, 4th of July this year, we met him for breakfast. So my husband and I are sitting in the restaurant. He comes running in, jumps on my lap. Meme, it's America's birthday. What are you going to give America for her birthday? Okay, I need some help. I had just read a story that morning about plastic straws, right? And how plastic straws are clogging up our waterways, and they don't decompose and all that kind of stuff. So I said, you know what, Miles? I'm going to buy you and me some stainless steel straws, and we're going to carry them with us wherever we go. And when someone tries to give us a drink, we're going to say, no straw, please. Well, they came in. He happened to be at my house when they got delivered. And I said, here, we got our straws. And we went downstairs. We made little bags for him. He looked at me and said, Meme, I am never using a plastic straw again. Good for you, Miles. The next time I was at his house, just to show you, he's crazy about it. We were in the living room. He said, Meme, come here, I got to show you something. I said, okay. So we went into the kitchen, and he opened up the cabinet under the kitchen sink, and he pulled out the dustpan and the hand broom. Said, see this? It's made with wood, and this is made with metal, no plastic. Out of the mouths of babes. So he's keeping me honest. I was just with him on Monday, and he was trying to figure out why he who lives in a high-rise in Watertown, why he can't compost. Yeah. Where are you going to bring it, Miles? Where are you going to put it? Like, what are you going to do with it? But his father is determined they're going to figure out some way that they can do it. Anyway, there's so many things that we can do on that front, and I'm sure you know most of them, but, carrying our own bags, the straws, obviously. There's people out there that are talking about zero waste. There's a woman that I read her book who has a mason jar that has like 2 years of her actual waste. She tries whatever she does buy, it's either not packaged or it's in something that's recyclable. But mostly what's in there is like little plastic, like the things like that. Apparently it's possible. But the problem is there's not a lot of places. If you live in a big city, there's a lot more places where you can go and bring your own packaging for flour and stuff like that. It's hard for us because we don't have a lot of those places. You can go in with your shampoo bottles and fill up the shampoo yourself and keep using the same bottle. We don't have a lot of that. I don't know, maybe you do up here. I know we don't Worcester, so it's a little bit of a challenge, but there's lots of ways to do it. And it doesn't have to be zero waste. It could be as little waste as I can possibly do, but just to be aware of the effects that we have and the choices that we make on the environment. And then the last one is rights and responsibilities. Catholic Church is unique in that teaching in the United States are real good, like the Bill of Rights. Right? We're real good about our rights. Not always followed with the idea of responsibilities. If we have rights, there's responsibilities that follow that. We have the right to vote, we got to vote. We have the right to food and shelter. We got to take care of the food and the shelter and so forth. I'm using a scripture story this time. The Matthew 25, Last Judgment. The people show up for the Last Judgment, and the parable that Jesus tells is, come on, we're going to separate the sheep from the goats. You're welcome. You fed the hungry, you gave drink to the thirsty, you clothed the naked, you visited the ill, you visited those in prison, you welcomed the stranger. And they look and they say, when did we do that? I don't remember doing those things. And he said, well, as long as you did it to the least of my people, you did it for me. And then he does the opposite. You're out because you didn't do those things. And just to kind of bring this to a close, I wanted to share a parable of the parable. A woman named Kathy Chesto, who was a religious educator, worked with family intergenerational catechesis, changed the story to this. And I think those of us who are parents, grandparents, can appreciate maybe our parenting in a whole different way. So when she's asked the question, or when you did this, this, and this, when did I do that? And the answer she heard was this: when did you feed the hungry? When you made all those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches day after day for your children. When did I give drink to the thirsty? All those pitchers of Kool-Aid that you fed all the kids in the neighborhood when they were thirsty on hot summer days, you were giving drink to the thirsty. But naked, I never, gave anything to the naked. Every time you bought new clothes because your kids grew out of the last set of clothes, you were clothing the naked. The ill. Okay, I get the ill. I know the kids were sick. They got me up in the middle of the night. I took care of them, right? I get that one. The stranger, but what about the stranger? Remember that teenager in your house that you didn't know where they came from? That's not the person I knew. You did it. And then lastly, but I know I never visit anybody in jail. I did not do that. What about the baby in the crib, behind the rails of that crib that couldn't help themselves, and you were there to lift them up? We're doing this stuff day in and day out, just to be maybe more aware of it. That's what I hope that we accomplished a little bit tonight. Not to say you need to do it, you're doing it. I know you're doing it here. I know you're doing it in your families. Maybe just to not pat ourselves on the back, maybe just to be aware of who we're doing it for. Right? That's what it's about. And I'm going to take my kissing out just for the prayer at the end. God, source of all light, we are surrounded by the darkness of the injustices experienced by your people. The poor who are hungry and search for shelter, the sick who seek relief, and the downtrodden who seek help in their hopelessness. Surround us and fill us with your Spirit who is light. Lead us in your way to be light to your people. Help us to be salt for the world as we share your love with those caught in the struggles of life. We desire to be your presence to the least among us, and to know your presence in them as we work through you to bring justice and peace to this world in desperate need. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen. I thank you.
Thank you.
Faith-filled people. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions about that?
You know, the Leominster is called the Plastic City because it was developed here.
Do you have any plastic employees? I know, and now that you say that, yes, I remember my husband was working up here and he toured
It's
the
also the
facility.
pink flamingo.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Anybody have any questions for Beth that you want to offer to?